Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Smallbrain Records Music Podcast. Today with us we have special guest Paul Nicholson, graphic designer under the name of Number Three. And you've been doing graphic design now for about how long?
Well, if you include when I first got work, I was technically still at university, so since 1991, so 28 years.
Oh, sweet.
Frightening.
So, I guess, do you want to go ahead and give yourself a little introduction for people who may not know who you are?
Well, most people will know me for doing music based graphics. Obviously recently with the rise of popularity of Aphex Twin, that's where a lot of people have gotten to know me. But I used to do a lot of music graphics through the 90s, and then probably around about 99, 2000, with the demise of kind of vinyl, all that work started to drop off, and what work was around, there was so small margins on jobs that, record labels were just charging hardly anything to do the work. So it just wasn't practical. With the resurgence of popularity of vinyl, and I think as well tied into what's been going on with online sales, you've seen music-related graphics kind of surge again.
Right.
So it's been good for me to kind of go back to really my first love, which was music-based graphics. Other people have known me through doing the Laughing Man logo, which was for Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. So that goes back to, I think, about 2002, 2003, that sort of time. And I subsequently worked on the second series doing the individual 11 logo type. So a lot of work that I get from Japan is really from people knowing about that. And as you can imagine, the sort of person who maybe in their teens was into Ghost in the Shell have gone on to work in kind of tech-based industry. So a lot of the work I get from Japan is kind of companies dealing with AI or phone apps, things like that. So it's quite good because I think my style tends to be a bit future forward. So working with techno companies or techno musicians works well.
Right.
Obviously, I'm not going to get work to do, I don't know, a champagne packaging or perfume. It's just not right. But through the 90s and up until 2012, I had a number of graphic-based T-shirt brands. So a lot of the sort of work that I was doing would end up printed onto clothing. Most recently, it was a brand called TerraTag, which we kind of pulled the plug on in 2012.
Yeah.
So there's no plans as yet, but at some point I want to get back into some elements of clothing design and kind of graphics on clothing. So it'd be quite good to get busy in that direction. I've made all the foundation for it all. So it's I've bought sewing machines and various threads and garments I'm going to work on, but now it's just kind of finding the time.
So you work on a lot of the actual fabrics themselves, then?
Not the fabrics. Initially I'm just looking at maybe chopping up garments and reassembling them, kind of upcycling. I'm really into that kind of side of things. And where you see it working really well at a kind of high art, high fashion end is people like Yoji Yamamoto. And is it Yoji Yamamoto? Hold on a minute. Yeah, there's let me search them out. But there's a couple of fashion designers that are developing kind of garments that are basically remixes, collaborations.
Yeah, my brother's really into fashion wear and stuff. I just wear whatever fits well.
Not
Um,
Yoji Yamamoto. I'm getting the designer mixed up. But here we go. Junya Watanabe. So he's worked with like Caramore, Carhartt, North Face, and I really like that approach to garment design, where you're kind of taking classics from each of those brands, but severely kind of reinterpreted them. I mean,
right.
Junya Watanabe with Caramore, he took the rucksack and turned a rucksack into a jacket, things like that. I mean,
Oh wow.
it's just fantastic. You've also got, people like Human Made out of Japan. I mean, most of these designers seem to be Japanese. It seems to be part of their philosophy.
Hmm.
Having a long interest in kind of Japanese culture anyway, there's this idea of not being revolutionary. Is more about evolving ideas, and it's quite interesting to see how they will take something and just refine it and refine it and refine it. So where you get brands like, say, Buzz Rickson, that will take kind of classic American post-war kind of nylon flight jackets, but just research and research and research it and make these copies which are just absolutely, to that last detail, absolutely perfect reproductions. It's that kind of mentality.
Hmm.
So I quite like the idea of taking some of those items of clothing that I really like and just reinterpreting them. Which I mean, I may be being over ambitious, because again, it's a question of how soon and how well I can learn how to put clothing together. It
Right.
may be something where it's just over ambitious, but I mean, you got to start somewhere. So I'm sure once I've got aspects of using a sewing machine down, it's just a question of patience and attention to detail.
Right, right. And like, since you've kind of already had a start to your graphic design already by a long shot, it should be much easier as well.
Well, I think a large part of what I'd like to do with clothing is more about how blocks of colours work against each other, and the composition of shapes of colours and blocks of colour. So a lot of the time, like I say, by taking garments that are all made, if it's just a question of removing panels and replacing them or adding bits over, the complicated thing of, say, doing waistbands or pockets, I'm not really getting involved with.
Right.
So initially, it's really one of working within my abilities.
Mm.
And as these will be one-off pieces initially, it's kind of like a lot of the time, manufacturers and designers have to be aware of, well, we've got to make 1,000 of these, or we've got to
Hmm.
make 100 of these. So a lot of the practicalities that would confront a designer won't obviously be on my radar, because if it takes me 2 days to make something, it's not a problem.
Right.
Whereas if Selfridges or Beams in Japan ring me up and go, "We really love this. Can we have 100?" Then I'm really in a problem.
Yeah, for
So yeah,
sure.
it's kind of I think following my heart, doing something that I'm really interested in. Um, Also, as well, it is, rather than just presenting myself as one thing,
Right,
as
right.
a like logo designer. I think it's that thing that the Instagram can kind of reflect a little bit more of what I do. And I
Hmm.
think as well is having bridged the generation that's pre-internet and post-internet. I mean, one of the things that the internet allows you to do is pursue more. Would self-indulgent be the right word? I guess it allows you to pursue more artistic avenues, because you've got a way to put that out there and let it be seen. I mean, to have done this, say, 20, 25 years ago would have been completely self indulgent, because other than the people who see you wearing it. There wasn't really much opportunities to present projects like that.
True.
So, you know, it's an interesting time in that respect.
For sure. And we've been noticing a lot for these last few podcasts that one of the biggest keystone parts that the people have been talking about, especially in like the DJ Food interview, have been the rise of like the internet and how much that's changed everything. And it's without a doubt, as you said, helped with this and changed your graphic design a lot too. Wouldn't you probably agree?
Well, completely. You know, in some ways, you deal with the hand you're dealt, but it's that thing. When I left university, I'd already done work for a techno club called Knowledge and for
Mm-hmm.
Aphex Twin. So the scene back then was very small. So by
Right.
virtue of being part of it, you were known. So a lot of the time it was very much word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So you would just get a phone call and somebody'd say, I've got this project. So just as you get an email or you get a direct message on Instagram, I mean, whatever channel people have at their disposal, they'll find you one way or the other.
Right.
I think the difference back then is that university courses were very difficult to get onto.
Mm-hmm.
So as a graduate, you were part of a very small group of individuals who'd been trained to do a specific job. So as a graphic designer in 1992, when I graduated, I was part of a small group anyway. And that niche that I occupied was made even smaller because my primary interest was techno music and
Mm-hmm.
electronic dance. So there weren't that many designers. And once you then narrow that down to a very particular but small niche within the music scene, I kind of commanded a position that was, well, quite a small one, really. At that point in time, I could probably name 3 or 4 designers that you would say were in the same area of work or direct competition. So you had like Designers Republic or Peter Saville at the Me
Right.
Company. Whereas now, I mean, you've only got to go onto Instagram and know that you are one of thousands of very competent and exciting designers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I guess to touch again on that whole thing with starting up, how exactly did you get into the whole like aside from having an interest into techno music and stuff, how exactly did you kind of work your way into being, in my opinion, one of the more renowned people in note for graphic design for specifically techno music, being done like Aphex Twin's logo and stuff, because that's pretty huge, you know.
Well, I obviously you question that and you get questioned that. So I think that generally speaking, I try not to follow too closely any particular trends that are um, affecting design. I am aware, again, you look at Instagram and there is this style of graphics where you've got kind of elements of 3D shapes intermixed with photography and kind of retro fonts.
Mm-hmm.
I think the inspiration is early computer-based graphics, say from the 80s, and it's where people have given it that new spin. So people like Dave Rudnick is probably the better of that genre of design, but there are many people, I guess, working in a similar way, but not doing it as well. So
Right.
once you're aware that there's a certain movement or trend, my usual reaction is to avoid creating anything that looks like that. At the same time, you want to try and work in a way that is recognizably yours. But it's that thing as well is that you always want to try and push it forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's making any sense,
No,
but
that makes
it's like,
sense.
uh, yeah, avoiding. trends generally.
Right, right.
Um, but it's one of those things. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I guess I've noticed that as well from talking to you and DJ Food, who are both, I guess, from the same time. You both have started off around the same year, and now you both have
Well,
said very similar things to like stay out of
well,
the main.
DJ Food interviewed me
Oh,
round about the
really?
time 25th anniversary of Selected Ambient Works. The interview we didn't materialize into anything. But I know when I meet other people of a similar age, people who kind of came onto the scene in the early 90s,
Hmm.
a lot of the time you do share similar experiences. And I think more so probably pre-internet generation, the avenues open to you were a lot narrower and the options were far fewer. So usually the experiences do have similar kind of starting points and develop, develop, oh God, development. Oh, I can't even say it now. You know, when you get a word stuck in your head, and that's the only way you're going to say it from now on. But you know, the roots, or as you
Right,
guys
right,
say, routes. So the routes that people would take were very similar.
right,
You
right.
know, having to go to a record label with a portfolio, um, having to go to reprographics houses with your work, and it's changed technically quite considerably. So I
Hmm.
think that you know, many of those experiences are the same, and as well, especially with techno in the early '90s. I worked with a club called Knowledge, and it was the first of its kind that I'm aware of, definitely within the UK. I don't know if there's historians out there of the development of techno music, but I think at the time, globally, it was one of only a few clubs that were catering towards the darker, harder side of techno.
Hmm.
You know, you probably had like Trezor in Berlin and Underground Resistance out of Detroit. So it's that kind of thing where um, it was a lot smaller scene. So you kind of shared many experiences. Whereas I think now coming into electronic dance music, there's so many subgenres and so many clubs now catering to an audience that must run into the millions. I mean, when you
Right.
see people like Nina Kravitz, for example, with whatever it is, 1.5 million followers, and every time she posts a picture, she's getting like 75,000 likes. I mean, the scale and size of the market now is just off the map.
Right, right.
And
Yeah.
also the complexity and variety of music now.
Hmm.
Um, Even individual artists now have the opportunity to work in so many different styles.
For
So whether
sure.
it be somebody like Aphex or Amon Tobin, it's like, well, here's my ambient side, and here's my aggressive drum and bass side, and here's my kind of pure noise.
Hmm.
So people are, you know, presented with so much product now and
Right,
so much
right.
options.
Yeah, and about that, I guess, kind of to change the subject a little bit, but with working with specifically musicians, we had talked a little bit about, like, you said that, you know, it's much easier for you to design a graphic design for music than it would be for me. For example, I tried to do like graphic design for my logo and for like album covers, and I I have no, I can't visualize it at all. Whereas you know, you can you kind of visualize an aesthetic or a design from listening to music?
The reason why I particularly love logo type and logo design is that the thought process is very specific to a client, and the way that I like to start is always to, you know, talk with the client and get an idea of what they're into. And it could be anything, you know, it's not, I don't want people to just send me logos they like, because
Right.
that would influence me too directly. And
Hmm.
also as well, there would be the
A derivative of
fear
that.
that, well, yeah, you might be influenced, and something comes into it that is, yeah, a derivative of
Right,
something
right.
that's already out there. So it's usually quite good to listen to the music, or just find out what films people are into, or even colors, because I think all these um, reflect a kind of emotive aspect to the individual. So it's quite good to start with quite esoteric bits of information, and then, in a way, get a feel for it.
Right,
And a
right.
lot of the time, the forms that I create, it's not like you could attach something tangible to it, like a meaning or
Right.
an understanding. But sometimes it's more just it feels right.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I mean, you take something like the Aphex Twin logo. There isn't anything that I could say was a direct um, influence.
Hmm.
I know by and large what sort of things I was into at the point in time, but it wasn't relating directly to anything. It just, the shapes just felt right. And I was working a lot with kind of amorphic curves, and just
Right.
these kind of shapes that would just roll into one another. They didn't follow any kind of golden section, or anything that you could attribute as kind of design rules. It just felt right. And I know sometimes when I look at things, the imbalance can sometimes throw you, but when you look at it as a whole, you're like, well, it kind of works.
Yeah, for sure. And I think
Oh,
that's one of the biggest things that attracted me to what you've done in the past. With specifically like I've talked to so many different graphic designers over the last like year and a half, working just in general and trying to figure out how to do it, and none of them have ever came close to the level of just in material kind of, you can't really grasp it, but it just works so perfectly as the stuff that you've really worked with, which in my opinion is absolutely amazing.
well, I think um, I many respects, I've been fortunate in so much that I've always been my own boss. So for a long time, I was a partner in a company that was design and print. So we specialized in garment printing. So I had quite a long period of dealing with other fashion labels, record labels, developing um, t-shirts and garments for them. So it's quite good as a discipline to be working in your own way, but be
Hmm.
brought into projects as I guess, a specialist in areas of design and applied graphics in garments. So it was good in that sense that um, I was never really dancing to someone else's song. So
Right.
it allowed me to always really involve myself specifically in things that interested me.
Hmm.
So a lot of the research that I've been involved in, or projects I've been involved with, have been things I've been into. So I think whereas a designer may end up at an agency, you might end up doing packaging for fabric conditioner, or you
Right.
know just a job. Um,
Hmm.
Luckily, I've kind of avoided that. So I, like I say, it's good to have had a mindset where you're constantly looking at things that excite you, or looking for inspiration for things that you're going to create, rather than trying to just address the needs of a client. But
Right, right.
what's a good counterbalance, though, is when I have been brought in on projects, you are ultimately having to listen to the client. And even now, like with logo design, I mean, every project I work on, you start with, usually 5 or 6 ideas.
Mhm.
And, when I present something to a customer, I try to show different approaches, show how, well, this is what it looked like if you go down this route. So it's a process of panning out the best ideas. So the 6 usually will be 2 that are light, then the 2 will be developed, and then it's down to 1, and then it's usually a question of, right, this is the one we want, but can you just try this? So
Mhm.
there's always going to be input from clients. Every now and again you'll do a logo and you just nail it first time,
Right,
or
right.
you show a couple of designs and people might go back and forth, but ultimately they'll go back to the first iteration. So I did a logo for an American record company recently, Red Hyenas. It recently went up on the Instagram, and it was one of those occasions where I submitted, I think, 6 designs, and they just said that's the one.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, do you want any changes to it? Is there anything you'd like to see? It's like, nope. So yeah, it happens sometimes. Then other times it may take you 5 or 6 um, submissions
Right.
until you get it nailed.
Yeah, for sure. And and I guess again, like with working with someone, from someone like from my perspective, I have little to no graphic design experience at all. When you work with someone like, say, Aphex Twin or musicians in general, specifically, um, what kind of stuff do you usually try to incorporate in the design process of a logo?
Well, at the moment, I'm kind of without really doing anything to get the work. I'm getting the work that's enough work to keep me busy. So
Mm-hmm.
invariably, people come to me having seen the Instagram or knowing that I've done this logo or this job. So by and large, I'm just asked effectively to do my thing. As I say, part of my process to try and find, um, I guess, some empathy with what the project is about by asking for those mood boards or examples of music that have been created. I'm looking for some kind of feeling, something that I can put across through um, the design, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no point creating something that's very square and angular if the person's creating very mellow music. It just wouldn't
Yeah,
be
for
the
sure.
right balance. So, a lot of the time, once you know where they're coming from and you've listened to the music they might be doing the graphics for, you start to get a feeling for what will and won't work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, outside of the music industry, obviously there's different set of parameters. You don't have the luxury of a piece of music to inspire you. So on those occasions, you may be wanting to know who the customer would be, what type of people would be going to that website or listening to that app or whatever.
Like when you work on stuff and the stuff I've seen on your portfolio, it's very, they all have some kind of link, and then I can very easily say, oh yeah, these are all done by the same guy, but they're very, very different for each one. For like, for example, the one on your Instagram with like the industrial kind of pipes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That one was a really, really unique one, and I had never seen anything like that. And then there's stuff like the Aphex Twin selected ambient works vinyl covers, which are completely different.
It's there. I mean, put very simply, because obviously, like anything, there's multitudes of um, variations. Nothing's black and white. But on this occasion, I will make it black and white. But it's that thing. You as a designer, you can create a house style that everybody knows, and whenever you do a project, you simply apply your way of working to it. So for example, like the aforementioned David Rudnick or Designers Republic, they are great designers at creating something that is ultimately their artwork. So
Right.
whether the Designers Republic do Sun Electric or the Wipeout cover so on and so forth, you know that it's the Designers Republic. And then you have other designers, I know, like greats like Paul Rand, who will always work to the requirements of the customer, and his approach would be to come up with the best design for that job.
Right.
And I would like to say, or I certainly work towards this goal of kind of occupying some kind of middle ground where
Mm-hmm.
there's enough of an essence of what I'm about to say, oh, well, that's from me, but at the same time, try and work in different ways so that um, each project has got its own flavor.
Right.
So I think the work you're talking about with the pipes might be for um, the mover, Marco Cadapana, out of Germany. So around about the time he got back in contact with me, I'd been doing a lot of work, kind of cutting up photographs and creating composites,
Oh,
and
right.
he'd seen it, so it just kind of fitted in well. So I
Mm-hmm.
was able to develop through him a series of work that was based primarily on pictures I'd taken, close-ups of aircraft.
Oh,
So
right.
aircraft components, things like undercarriage, where the wheels go into the wheel bay, things like that. So for me, I love all of that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been photographing it for years. So I wanted to turn that into something rather than just here's a load of pictures of close-ups of aircraft. And likewise, there's a guy out of New York State called 81 Neutrons that I've been working with since about this time last year. So with him, it was initially a logo design, and then I've gone on to do. I think I've just finished the fourth EP cover for him,
Oh,
and
nice.
again, it was in talking to him, he'd given me a whole host of things that inspired him, which from a
Mm-hmm.
design point of view were completely unrelated and weren't something that would have been easy to link together. So it was everything from 1990s computer games to Buddhist spirituality.
Right.
So it was something that was, late at night when you laid in bed, ideas just go over in your mind. And it was just that thing. I let it mull for a while and just see how you could interpret that in a way. And then I had this idea of creating a series of spacecraft or interplanetary vehicles, and each one be themed upon what that EP was about. So each EP, he would come back to me and say, well, it's about this, that, and the other. And I would find images that would somehow I could turn into a spacecraft.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's things like that where, um, part of the fun of a designer is to try and come up with as many different ways of working.
Right.
But
Yeah.
again, it goes back to what I was saying, like with the Designers Republic or David Rudnick, is that you do that at the expense of being instantly recognizable. And in this
Mm-hmm.
world where the Bankses and people like that have great success from having a very recognizable style, um,
Right.
like I say, by kind of jumping about a bit, it's not as marketable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I guess another thing along that kind of ties with that is I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but your most famous thing so far has probably been like the Aphex Twin stuff you've done. Um,
I mean, it's an interesting uh, situation to be in because um, obviously, as a design, you're also um, the recognizable graphic or the recognizable visual element of somebody who's doing very well himself anyway.
right.
Um, would the designer of the Nike tick or the Coca-Cola lettering be as successful had the product bombed?
Right.
And I think it's like with Aphex Twin had he got frustrated with the music industry, and after Selected Ambient Works 2, just threw in the towel and got a job as a lifeguard in Cornwall or something. It's that kind of thing where it would be a footnote in history. So I think as a designer, you are aware and humbled by the fact that other people's subsequent success helps you getting recognized. But the flip side of that, obviously, is that, well, if it wasn't a good logo, it would have been dropped. I mean, if it wasn't a good logo, Richard would have dropped it in 1994 or 1995. The fact he's stuck with it means that over all of these years, 28 years, it still resonates with him, and it still resonates with his fan base. I think as time goes by, it just seems to get stronger. In so much that, I mean, I'm forever being sent photographs of people who've had tattoos where it appears. I mean, the series that I did on my Instagram of, I call it the Aphex mutations. It's like wherever it basically crops up, I just started posting them. And what started out really as something I thought might run for a couple of weeks, ran for a couple of months. And I've since been sent enough material now to let it run for another several more months. And, it's good, because every designer needs that thing that's going to make them stand out, make you recognized. And, if I am just the guy that did the Aphex Twin logo, I mean, if it opens doors and it gets me work and it interests people enough that they look at the rest of what I do, well, so be it. And certainly, there's work that I've done subsequently that I personally think is better.
Right.
But because the work isn't for someone as successful as Aphex Twin, it probably won't get the recognition. But then there's always that opportunity. There could be somebody I'm working for now that in 10 years' time will be as successful and as well known as Aphex Twin.
And yeah, for sure. And
but definitely within electronic music, though, I mean, how many musicians have gone on to be as successful as Richard? I mean, there are bigger names in electronic music, but maybe for different reasons. I think what's good with having worked on the Aphex Twin logos, I think where he goes with his music, I would ultimately like to think I'm trying to do something on a similar mindset with design. So it kind of ties in well. I mean, if all I'd done for 28 years was derivatives of the Aphex Twin logo, then people might go, "Oh, well, you're just feeding off the success of Richard." Whereas I think the thing is I keep trying to push the envelope out and try new things. So, like I say, I think like Richard, what's quite interesting as a musician is, depending what your personal tastes are, everybody finds something they like. So whether you're the ambient Aphex or the analog Aphex or the caustic window Aphex, there's enough going on there to find something for everyone. Sure. I think, as I say, what gives me the energy is that constant desire to kind of find new ways of expression, new ways of doing things.
And one of the reason they brought him up, I guess, was, do you ever find it kind of annoying, the fact that a lot of people might recognize you as just the guy who did the Aphex Twin logo? Do you ever try to be like, well, I've done more than that, or you know what I mean?
Well, as I say, if it brings people, ultimately these days it's your Instagram. I mean, websites kind of a little last century really now, but it's that kind of thing. By any means necessary, I would rather have that recognition than not.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I can put up other work on Instagram and get similar kind of levels of likes to when I post stuff that relates to Aphex, then, it's definitely not all about one project.
Right.
Um, as I say, I mean, if somebody's working on a project that they envisage to be as big as Aphex Twin and they want a good logo, come my way, and then I can say that I also did that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I mean, within again, it really depends which group of people I'm talking to. So there's a massive following for Marco Cadapana and the Mover. So if you're into hardcore techno, then people know me for having worked with Mark, and then I originally created the Mover logo in 1992, and have worked on and off with Mark since then, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot more recently as his popularity has increased with a kind of newfound interest in the harder side of techno.
Right. Right.
And as I say, in Japan, I'm known more for the Laughing Man logo, and stuff that I did with Terratag, because it was kind of anime manga inspired design work. So, if it was down to one project, it'd be a little bit disheartening. But
Right. Right.
yeah, I don't know. It's like, as I say, if it gets people interested, then that's fantastic.
For sure. Y- And I guess another interesting question I had: what kind of music do you listen to, like in your free
Oh,
time?
I mean, my taste is very varied.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in so much I can go from really minimal kind of abstract soundscapes right through to ear bleed kind of noise and
Mm-hmm.
and hardcore. Uh, Let me think. Recently, um, there was somebody I got into just the other week that I hadn't heard of. Meth Juzz.
Hmm.
I think I've pronounced that right. Yeah, Mefjus, Mefjus, and Former. So that's like out, I think it's a Dutch label called Noisier. I do love kind of chopped up, um, I guess, breakcore. I mean, there's so many names now, I can't keep up with
Right.
it. But
Right.
anything that's distorted, broken, uh, kind of difficult to listen to,
Mm-hmm.
gets me going. I mean, that goes right back to when I was a kid and I got into people like The Art and Noise and Vangelis. So
Right. Right.
anything that was kind of electronic, and this is early Vangelis as well. I mean, obviously people know Vangelis for the Blade Runner soundtrack and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. If you listen to stuff he did in the 70s, like the album Albedo 0.39, um, it's just fantastic. You've just got these kind of soundscapes with just audio over. And in the case of the title track, it's just all measurements of space, the mean equatorial diameter of the Earth and all this kind of stuff. So I love that kind of thing. I really love a musician that does quite dark stuff that almost touches on, say, goth. Is Blank Mass.
Oh,
So
I've heard
he's
of
at
them.
Blank Mass Burial. Going back to my youth in the 80s, like labels like 4AD, so Cocteau Twins, This Mortal Coil.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I recently went to see a band from Ukraine called Daka Braka. So they
Okay.
kind of mix up kind of Balkan music and traditional music, but giving it a 21st century spin. But to go
Right.
to a stage and see three girls and a guy playing and everything from balalaicas and pianos, and there's one track where the guy even plays a Jew harp. So it's that kind of thing where the sounds, because they don't come from um, something you're familiar with, just sound completely fresh.
For sure.
Um, But then it can go quite poppy as well. So David Bowie, Depeche Mode, just trying to think, Royksop,
Oh
So
yeah.
I do quite like, sleigh bells. So I think when things can go more, if pop music is done well, it's fantastic. Radiohead, Tame Impala, Suicide, Human League. I mean, it's all over the place. I think as well is the 80s were quite a good time for music
For
in that
sure.
post-punk era. I was too young for punk just.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have been 7 when punk was around. But the first music scene I got into was the ska revival of the late 70s. So bands like The Beat, Two Tone, Madness, The Specials. So I think right from day one, really, I always had that association that music was to dance to,
Right, right.
because ska music was very much about the dance. If you watch those old videos, it was all about having the moves and how you dressed as well. It was very much about how you looked.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always that thing that it was the visual aspect of music.
Right, right.
Um, then so that would be, I'd be 9, so it was like 1979 that I got into kind of ska music, and then pretty quickly, I think somebody who had an older brother gave me the Vangelis 0.39 LP.
Right, right.
Um, and then there was a British band called Blancmange, who were kind of like electronic as well.
Hmm.
Talk Talk, I remember them.
Oh yeah, I've
And
heard about
then
them.
if you talk to anyone, I mean, if you talk to people like DJ Food and anyone of my generation from UK, I mean, John Peel will always come up in conversation,
John
because at
Peel.
that point in time, you had pretty much one radio channel that
Mm-hmm.
would play um, contemporary music. And on that one channel, you had one DJ that was playing anything out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
So, on any one night listening to John Peel, you could have everything from quite musical or pop right through to, The Fall and really kind of dark or kind of
Right, right.
distorted. And then, so around about 84, you had labels like ZTT, so with Propaganda, Art of Noise, and then 4AD. And then from there, it just kind of span out, because round about the mid 80s, you had the whole dance music thing going off. So Washington Go Go, then Chicago House, then Detroit Techno, then what you had going on in the UK with bands like Mars with Pump Up the Volume.
Mm-hmm.
It just really exploded. So by the time you get to about 88, you had the UK kind of acid thing going off,
Mm-hmm.
and in particular, Warp out of Sheffield, and you
Yeah.
had the Manchester sound as well. So you had a guy called Gerald Tcoy, 808 States, even the Happy Mondays were part of the kind of Manchester scene. And then out of places like Leeds and Sheffield, LFO, um, and Warp Records.
For sure.
Whereas, and perfect timing, really. I was 18, moved to London. You had the acid house thing had kind of mutated a bit. I missed Shoom by about 6 months.
Oh,
So Shoom's the kind of it's seen as the club where acid kind of kicked off in London. So I missed Shoom by a couple of months, but I got to know Andrew Weatherall and got to see him play loads through the late 80s and right up until the, I guess, mid 90s. So
mm-hmm.
I'd done work with his labels. Um, yeah, so and when I came to London, you had the whole pirate radio thing going on.
Right,
So
right.
Kiss FM was pirate radio, and from 1 in the morning till 4 in the morning, twice a week, you had, I think it was called The Outer Limits. So you had the two Collins, Colin Dale and Colin Favor, who, again, it was like the go-to place if you wanted to listen to the best that techno had to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on one of the Collins shows, I think it was Colin Dale's show, that I first heard Aphex Twin.
Right.
So that was the original analog bubble bath that was released out of Mighty Force Records. And I think I was seeing a girl from Cornwall, and she was into, I guess, more like the house end of music.
Mm-hmm.
I'd met her dancing. She was just a fantastic dancer. So, you know, I had to go over and give it a shot,
right,
as it were. You know, you know, when you see someone and it's just, wow. So I went over and got chatting to her, and we started dating, and because we would kind of like just listen to each other's music. She said, "Oh, well, if you like all this stuff, you should meet my mate Richard. He does all that stuff, that noise." So yeah, that was my introduction to Richard. And then I did. There was a competition announced on Colin Dale's show to create a logo for a club. He was about to start with Colin Favor and a girl called Jane Howard, called Knowledge. So this would be about November. I think it'd be about October, November '91. The competition was announced, and I found out after the event that there was 250 people entered.
Oh wow!
And Jane had said to me that once she'd seen my entry, which was quite early, she said that she knew right from the moment she saw it that was going to be the logo.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And again, like I say, it was you know, right time, right place. So when I got to meet the Collins and Jane, she was like, "Well, we can't really pay you, but if you come down to the club every week and help out, we can give you 50 quid.
Right.
We need a newsletter done, so you just come down to interview the DJs and put together a newsletter." So during that period in time, I got to meet a whole raft of the techno glitterati. So let me think. Sven Vath, Fabio and Groove Rider, Richie Horton.
Oh, nice.
So, in fact, I'll tell you what was really interesting with Richie Horton was there was a interview with him talking about his early days, and there's a photograph of him in the car, and he's talking about going to a club in London he'd been invited to. And when I freeze framed the video and zoomed in, he had a London A to Z map open and he was pointing at Victoria. So that's where the Club Knowledge was.
Oh, wow.
At the SW1 Club Victoria. So it's great to be able to link that photograph with a particular point in time.
Right.
And to say, well, about maybe 2 or 3 hours after that photograph had been taken, I would have been dancing in front of him playing and would have been chatting to him. So you know, I don't know if that's tickles anyone else, but that kind of connection I just thought was so good.
No, that's for sure pretty awesome, yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that must have been such an interesting time to be working with all those people and to have been in that scene.
I think it was an interesting time in London as well, because, I mean, obviously London now has had a massive influx of money over the last 15, 20 years. And when I look at pictures of London in the late 80s, early 90s, it's a completely different place. Mm-hmm. It was a lot dirtier and just run down. If you think about places like Notting Hill Gate now, where, you know, houses are going for £4 and £5 million and shops probably cost thousands of pounds, a week to rent, and then you see a picture from 1989 and it's just a complete shithole. Just totally run down, kind of knackered old storefronts, and
Right.
just so London across the board has just changed phenomenally in that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as well is the type of clubs you go to now. I mean, when you go to a place and there's tons of security, there's metal detectors, there's several £100,000 worth of audio equipment. All the clubs are beautifully done out with, state of the art DJ rigs and beautiful decor. I mean, it's completely
Right.
different. The days of kind of gaffer taped up Technic 1210s and kind of knackered old speakers and 25-year-old sofas with springs popping out. It's that kind of thing where it'd be difficult to say which is better or which is worse, but it's completely different. That's for definite.
Right. Yeah, and that new club, Printworks in London.
Huh.
Have you gone to that at all?
Yeah. I knew a guy who was dating Nina Kravitz, so
Oh.
I'd done some work with him, and then I got to meet them down there. So I've met Nina a couple of times, and there was one night, the guy's Bjarki, an Icelandic DJ. So while he was getting ready for his set, I was sat in the hotel room with him in Old Street, and I think I ended up having about 3 hours just chatting with Nina about Russian politics. And I mean, this was around about the time, it is post-Trump coming to power, so all the stuff
Mm-hmm.
about Russian collusion and that relationship between the US and Russia. So it was really good chatting to an intelligent Russian and
Right,
getting
right.
a perspective on that. I mean, she's a very smart cookie, so it was great being able to kind of hear what she had to say.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we had a great old chat. I think we covered a lot of ground. It's a shame I don't get to meet them more often, but
Right,
I mean, these people live such kind of hectic lives,
for sure.
and especially, I mean, even in the 2 years since I first met them, I mean, they've both their careers have just skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially Nina's. I mean, she's just like now DJ superstar. I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
she's up there with the top best of them now. So yeah, I doubt I'll get to meet her again unless some abstract kind of reason our paths cross again.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. The scene of it is, I mean, from my point of view, being someone who hasn't grown up pre-internet and in the clubs or going out to clubs much at all, it seems like meeting people really all just comes down to how persistent you are and like just how well you can reach out and talk to people. Because it's much easier to get in touch with someone now, but it's also much harder because of how easy it is.
Well, this goes back to you saying about, do I mind if people recognize me or go on about the Aphex Twin logo? I mean, I'm not particularly great at self publicity, so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
really one for going out there and you know keep pushing at people, keep knocking at people's doors. So there's a part of me that it's part being kind of lazy, but also as well is there's a certain amount of pride where it's kind of like, well, if they're not going to contact you because of your work, I don't want to contact them, kind of thing. So there's a mixture of all of those emotions where I do tend to just let the work come to me.
Right,
Um,
right.
I know that's all well and good when it's coming to you. At some point, I will need to start um, getting it out there a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And I can rely on that indefinitely.
For sure, yeah. I mean, that's probably one of the
So
better references you can have for
yeah,
electronic music.
I think in part, it's gonna be one of just playing
True.
by the rules, really, and that being that, I'm going to have a more formal website that outlines things and catalogs things, so that your regular kind of marketing guy or commissioning guy at a business will look and go, oh, okay, this is the guy. I think as well is I wouldn't go, wouldn't be a bad idea to get like an agent or some kind of representation, because it'd be good to get a few kind of big jobs every now and again, because those are the ones that ultimately bring in the dough.
Right.
So it's good to pepper your year with a few kind of big jobs.
And do you think
that's all kind of just regular kind of normal design stuff?
Right. And I guess what were some of your favorite logos you've worked on, like that you just had so much fun working on and working with the people?
I mean that's kind of a tricky one, because well, there are so many aspects to what makes a job good. I mean, obviously, if something is recognized, that's great. If something is highly regarded or respected, so if a job wins you other work and you get recognized for it, that's great on a very practical, pragmatic level. People know me for that. It gets me work. Brilliant. But then there's also that thing where if I were to pull something out of my catalogue of work, it might not necessarily even be something that people have seen. It's that kind of thing where I think as well is, like the way you judge something. I might look at something, and in my experience and knowledge of design, I can look at something I've done and go, out of all of the stuff I've done, this is probably the most progressive or pushing the boundaries of. But if 9 times out of 10 looking at it can't read it, then it's not addressing a kind of quite fundamental need of design to communicate. Do you see what I mean? It's like,
for sure.
What makes something experimental or cutting edge doesn't necessarily make it good design.
Yeah, true.
And going back to Paul Rand, I think he famously said, "Good." What was it? Hold on, I'll have to remember now. You can edit all this out later. Make me sound intelligent. But it's like, would you rather do good design or original design? And it is that thing that originality sometimes comes with a caveat that nobody gets it. So there's a point somewhere in the middle where you find your voice, you create something that doesn't look like anything else, but at the same time, it does communicate to a large number of people. And would I don't know, would I be right in saying that something like the Aphex has done that? I mean, it's really for other people to judge, but I like to think that with the kind of curvy, amorphous way that I work, it is something that people go, oh, that's you, that's definitely you.
Yeah, true.
And yeah, I mean, they're I'm not really answering your question, am I? Rather than answering your question, I'm producing a load more.
Well, I guess
I honestly don't know. I wouldn't even know where to start. Let's have a look at my got my computer here. So
sweet.
I've been very pleased generally with the logos I've created over the last 18 months or so. But I think that reflects as well the fact that I went freelance in 2015. So the company I was a partner with, I left to concentrate on design. And I think for the first year or two after going freelance, a number of jobs came my way that were just kind of fortuitous. So I had some work doing illustration work, and I had some work working with fashion labels and clothing. So they weren't necessarily me going, this is what I want to do. I just took work on that came my way.
Mm-hmm.
I think around about 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to focus more on logo design. And again, without making a big deal of it, or even, through LinkedIn or a website or Instagram saying that, number 3 is logo design. It just kind of morphed that way. Things
Right.
just fell into place. So because I'm getting more and more kind of logo and branding work, I think that flow is just is good in so much that that's pretty much what I do now. And because of the amount of time I'm spending on it, the turnover of ideas is far greater. So
Right.
in that, it's like when I have a folder of all the logos that didn't make it. So as I say, usually with a project, I'll submit 6 and that'll get narrowed down until you get the final one. So all those kind of other ideas just get put into a folder. And what started out as a page is now about 15 pages where I just sort them out alphabetically. So what's great is that there's tons of ideas in there that were maybe too hot, too kind of out there. So for me, I feel it's really good to know that I've got that there. But
Mm-hmm.
the actual work that's been going out, so if anyone's looking at the Instagram, so the stuff I've been posting since January is really stuff that's the last 6 months, so the tail end of last year, and work that's this year. So when I look through my Instagram page, definitely the last 6 months I take great pride in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I like at the moment I'm posting a logo I did for an American record label called Upscale Recordings, and as I prepare the work for Instagram, I create these diagrams showing how the logo's constructed. So, certain angles that I've used, how the logo will break down into fifths or quarters or thirds. And it's that kind of thing where in analyzing what I've done in this manner, I'm finding patterns and rhythms that probably at the time I might not have even picked up on. It was just part of the process of creating it. So for me, in kind of presenting it this way, I'm quite proud in that sense. I'm able to show the depth that I've gone to and the level of thought. And I think again that's what I love about logo design. I mean, you might end up with just this really simple shape, but there could be 100 hours plus have been poured into that project, and that constant reduction
Mm-hmm.
of form, panning out the weaker ideas, refining, and as opposed to say, I know, regular graphic design in so much like page layout or
Mm-hmm.
just graphics. What's great with logo design is that attention to detail and the kind of focus. So it becomes almost like kind of fine art or sculpture in that you're pouring all of this time into one object.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, looking through your Instagram right now, actually, the thing you did with the Adidas Ultra Boost,
Hmm.
that was a really cool little like thing you did there. Do you have anything?
Well, a lot of designers will probably know of people like Talent House. They do what are called creative invites. So in
Mm-hmm.
this case, Adidas will approach Talent House and say, right, well, we want people to come up with ideas for the launch of the Ultra Boost 2019. And people like myself and designers from all over the world will basically commit a design. So from Adidas's point of view, it's fantastic because you'll get hundreds of designers all submitting work. And from that, you just need to find half a dozen posters that will go into production. On this occasion, it didn't go my way. I have had some success with Talent House. I think, though, it goes back to an earlier point as well, is that sometimes trying to be too original can, there's a kickback. And quite often when I do into things like Talent House, there's a little bit of frustration in seeing the decisions made by the people who make the final choice, because I'll look at it and go, well,
that's boring.
Yeah, but it's they'll have their own reasons for making those decisions, and they'll be aware of what the market is ready for. So it's always a little bit of a punt. I mean, I tend to use projects like this not so much. It'd be great to have some of these things go into print, but invariably I kind of use these as a kind of framework to experiment. So when I saw that, I thought, well, I like Adidas. Let's see what I can come up with. But yeah, ultimately what they end up with is kind of like what you'd expect. It's kind of illustration based. It's a bit kind of that kind of biro, hand drawn kind of thing, and that's not really my bag.
Yeah. I guess another thing I was wondering about is when you were starting off, who were some people that you really looked up to for art or graphic design?
Well, no one. I just thought they're all shit.
I guess that's just as good then, yeah.
No, I'm joking. That would be,
Oh.
very what do you call it? Arrogant. To a band from Leeds called The Age of Chance, and their first big hit, I guess, was they did a cover version of Prince's Kiss, bearing in mind that Prince's Kiss was still in the charts at the time, so it was a pretty rapid turnaround. But so I'd gotten into Designers Republic from their first commission, really, and I can't remember exactly, but both of the members of Design Republic didn't come from a graphic background. I think one had studied architecture and one I think, had studied philosophy. So it was that thing that they were coming at it almost from an intellectual standpoint. And the early Designers Republic was very much inspired by kind of advertising and the kind of posters that you get from socialist kind of propaganda. So when you look at the roots of the Designers Republic, it's quite interesting that Ian Anderson had kind of maintained that kind of standpoint that it was all kind of, how can I put it, like with advertising art and doing all these things that mocked it and mimicked it and kind of twisted the meanings. I like the 4AD sleeves. Right. That was Vaughan Oliver. But then graphically, I was at completely different end of the spectrum. I'd gotten into manga and anime quite early from a Western point, in so much that I was aware of kind of Gundam and the giant robots from about 1986. So definitely that kind of Japanese approach to design, full-on bright colors, explosions. That was definitely tickled me. I got into hip hop when I was 12, so Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, LL Cool J, Beastie Boys. I mean, all of that stuff going back to 82, 83, 84. So that went hand in hand with subway arts and ultimately graffiti art. So that was definitely an inspiration. Comic books, 2000 AD. Jamie Hewlett created Tank Girl around about 86 for Deadline magazine. So a lot of what was going on in the kind of underground British comic scene, I was a big fan of.
All right, yeah.
I've also been a big fan of just kind of like things like hazard warning labels and
Street
the
science.
sort of things like military stenciling and all of those kind of things. So
Right.
I don't know if there's a generic term for all of that style of graphics, but very functional, high vis.
Industrialism.
Yeah, in industrial graphics. So like the kind of orange and black stickers you get on the side of drums of toxic material and things like that, the radiation symbol, black and yellow chevron tape. So I mean that's always been a big part of the kind of graphics I'm into, is kind of non-graphics in a way. I mean, obviously real designers have had to sit down and create all of these things, but not in an attempt to create art or to create graphic design, just to communicate. So when you get graphics like that are so pure in communication,
Right.
so the way, and I, when you look at some of the logos that I've done, I mean, I'm on my Instagram looking at the stuff I did for Mover. I mean, these logos do end up looking like symbols for a paint company or something. It's that. I love that starkness. Less is
Yeah,
more.
I mean, and it really shows. Like when I think of the stuff you've done, and I've looked through your website before we kind of started talking. I kind of just looked through what you've done, and once I saw your website after seeing the Aphex Twin logo and seeing your Instagram, I saw the website and I saw the shipping container on it, and I was like, that's where he gets a lot of his inspiration from, those informational kind of. It really shows, and it's really really cool because like when I think about your logos, they have the same exact purpose, but for music.
Well, it's I've never been a fan of decoration, and when you have graphic movements like the maximal thing, and as I say, what's currently going on in graphic design now is it's become a decorative art. I mean, like I say, I really love David Rudnick's work, but he's part of this kind of movement to create decorative art, where a lot of the graphics you see for people, it's there's a lot of going on. There's 3-4 layers worth of stuff and lots of little bits of type and bits flying off, and let's throw in a 3D object, bit of chrome here, bit of neon color there. So it's this thing where it becomes an art form in decoration.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not deriding that. It's just, it's not where I'm coming from. And I love it to look at, but it's not the way I choose to work. So usually I tend to go the other way, where it's kind of more stark and stripped bare. I mean, the closest I think I get to kind of more decorative stuff would be, say, if I going back to the start of this year, yeah, I did a sleeve for a British musician called Locust out of a record label based in Seattle.
All right.
And the the sleeve is it's kind of chopped up video images. So when I spoke to Mark, who's Locust, he told me that he was really into the distortion you get from video, especially those kind of great screen grabs you get from the 80s of like when you get all those kind of breakdown of transmission lines going across the screen. So I'd scoured the net for good images and wanted to do something where it wasn't simply, oh, here's an image from a video and just put the logo over the top of it. So I created a composite of about 5 or 6 images, and as I kind of built up the layers of stuff, it's just that thing. It became like a tapestry or something, just a pattern. But the original image obviously got so distorted to a point that it's only once it's a girl enjoying herself from a adult-related movie. But it's not that's the point. It was just that the distortion lines on the original image were quite good, and that was a starting point. So as I started to add on to that, but there's 3 EPs in the series, so I'd gone back to them early on, having done research on kind of 80s theme. I noticed that a lot of the box art for VHS tapes would feature the RGB color. I don't know what you'd call it, color spectrum.
Oh, right.
Old TV screens are obviously RGB. So straight away I thought, oh, well, you've got RGB, so why don't 3 EPs be red, green, and blue? Because there's going to be 3 in the series. So they were down with that, but this is, oh, well, we won't actually call them red, green, blue. What's ended up happening is that's what they've ended up being called. So with red, it was because I guess, I don't know why, but I noticed that a lot of images that people have posted of screen grabs of porn, the colors would end up quite pink. And I don't know if it's that thing that because of the high numbers of flesh tones, that when they distort, it would distort more towards the pink end of the spectrum. But I thought it was quite interesting that you got these very strong red bias images. So instead of the humans looking like flesh, the humans ended up in these really bright reds and pinks. So that became the red EP. And then again, looking at old monitors in the 80s, you had the classic green type out of black monitor. So I also found all these kind of images of kind of glitched monitors or early versions of Windows that have completely died, and you just get these screens with kind of green lines. So that became the green EP. And then again, what I thought was quite interesting, there was one night I was walking home, and when you pass someone's house and the TVs are on, the living rooms always look blue.
Yeah.
Third EP, I thought, well, I'll go with old images from TVs, but give it a very blue bias. I like that. I like that fact. Like I say, living rooms always look really cold.
Yeah, true. I never thought about that.
So, like I say, I think it kind of illustrates like with the 81 neutrons where I had the idea of the spacecraft. I kind of find that if you have a concept that you can hang the ideas off, usually the ideas form a lot easier when you've got like a purpose or a direction. So again, rather than it being just purely decoration, I kind of go about it, and things have to have a justification. There has to be a reason to do something, even if it's completely indulgent or completely satisfies my own needs. At least there's some kind of structural element that differentiates it from just being a pretty pattern or something that's aesthetically pleasing. So I think as well is for me, part of it is the idea. I enjoy the whole process of coming up with the concept with the idea, and sometimes the idea is probably more interesting than the final product. But that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, just from talking to you for a little bit, it seems that the world of like graphic design is so closely tied into so many other things, but it's still such a unique and separate space for creative arts, which kind of leads me to think, and like in some of the other podcasts we've done, we've kind of touched on, like my friend Emmanuel, who usually runs them. We're exactly the manifestation of what we've been creating, whether it's music or art, exactly comes from. Where it's like when we had DJ Food on, I asked him about if he thinks about what his music will do for people when he's making it, like when they listen to it, if he thinks, oh, it might make them feel like this and stuff, and the answer is absolutely not. Where when you work on a logo, you kind of keep that in mind, what you're thinking about and what you want the idea of it to be,
Well, I don't. Is there an answer to that? I think, like I say, if nothing else, the creative process has to be one where you challenge yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, within fine art, that's kind of understood because people understand that part of the process is almost like this soul searching. So you kind of expect that of a painter or a sculptor or whatever. I think with a lot of graphic arts being associated more with commercial art, I think usually all graphic artists get grouped into that block. Oh, well, your art is commercial art, so it's not profound, or it's not got any other meaning than to sell a product. And I think that does a disservice to the graphic arts, because obviously at a time when typography was seen as being revolutionary or groundbreaking, say with the Bauhaus movement or just the still, it's that kind of thing that as a typographer, you were addressing type as an artist would a painting, and people understood that. So when some of those Bauhaus fonts were created, and you look at the sketches that go into it and the writing that's associated to its production, you realize that, well, people took typography very, very seriously. It wasn't just candy floss. It was the real thing. And as I say, people talk about graphic arts, but again, usually graphic art as a kind of term would refer more to, like, say, illustration, that it's like an artistic type of graphic design. So as I say, I mean, I approach logo design with a level of thought and gravitas that I'd like to think I would do if I was trying to create other forms of art. And as I say, if you don't, it's not to say that everyone will understand it, but I think at the very least, if you're involved in the creative industry, you have to push yourself, because the market isn't necessarily going to do it. So if you're not going to do it, it's quite easy just to play to the crowd, to just give people what they want. But ultimately, I don't know, other than paying the bills, it's not really addressing anything. It's not producing anything. I mean, I can see flyers for festivals, and I look at the lineup and just think, my God, all the logos look the same. So all the music is going to sound the same. Everybody's going to be dressing one of about 3 brands. So you're going to see a ton of G Star or whatever. And it's that kind of thing where it's like it just becomes like I don't know, McDonald's or Subway or
Right.
it's just kind of commodity.
True.
And yeah, so my motivation is as much not to be a part of that, but
Hmm.
at the same time, try and make a living from it. But
True.
yeah, if you do it well, then like I say, the work will come to you.
Hmm. And I guess I had, as we're kind of approaching the end here, we're about an hour and a half in.
Mm.
Um, maybe a bit more open-ended question. Where do you think your art comes from? Like obviously yourself, but I mean from the musical point. When we talk about it, we've usually a lot of the times the same kind of phrase comes up that like the music we make isn't necessarily um, our music. We take it from somewhere else, and it has to have kind of respect. Like for the artists we've talked to, they don't feel like it's their music. They own it. It's everyone's.
Um, hmm. Well, definitely you can't create in a vacuum.
Right.
Um, you know, every time you open a book, every time you switch on the television, every time you log in, I mean, you are being bombarded with great artwork, great music, great films, whatever. So the thing is that everyone is responding to the zeitgeist,
Mm-hmm.
and really, it's just uh, 50 Shades of Grey, I guess. It just depends how far you want to be at the extreme, at the polemic. So it's like if you want to instantly be a hit within the Ibiza house scene, you'll look at what works there and you'll just emulate that style and you'll push and push and push to be part of that aspect of club music. But
Mm-hmm.
then I like to think that I always like terms like experimentation or work in progress. I kind of like the idea that every time I submit a job and it's approved and it gets used and somebody's out there using it, it's almost like I wipe the slate clean and I have to start again.
Mm-hmm.
So
Kind
the
of
next
like,
job, yeah, it has to be better, or it has to push it a little further, or be more refined, or just experimental. Or so, like when you said, well, would you choose one? And it's very difficult because usually my favorite work is the one I've just finished,
right, right.
because the next one will invalidate that, and it's constantly going forward. I'm sure there'll be a point in time when, I don't know, I'm on my deathbed and I'll still be thinking, oh, if I just had a bit more time, I could just bang. So I think that's what keeps me going, and it's the justification for what I do, in so much that I just want to keep pushing forward. Um, Sometimes it's a tiny step forward, sometimes it's a big step forward. But I'd like to think that it's constantly edging forward. And as soon as I feel that I'm just treading water or just repeating myself, then I've either run out of ideas or it's time to get a new job, because it's if I don't feel I'm moving forward, then there's no point.
Right,
And
right.
that's not, like I say, um, it it's not like I'm not like Eminem or Richie
Mm-hmm.
Horton. I don't make vast sums of money doing this, but I enjoy it. So, fingers crossed. I one day might make a good living from it.
Right.
But I've no complaints. I've no complaints. It serves me well, and definitely, I wake up every morning raring to go, which isn't bad for an old twat like me.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes you happy and you love doing it and it works, I mean, why not?
Well, it kind of reflects kind of more broader feelings I have regarding our society now and the obsession with wealth and notoriety.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of aspects of our society where I think people are deluding themselves. So if nothing else, I practice what I preach. I am living the dream or my approximation of it. So it's like I say. I mean, I couldn't come out with all of that idealistic bullshit if I wasn't actually doing it.
True.
I couldn't say all of those things, but then just be a jobbing designer, working for the man. So at least this way, I take great self satisfaction and kind of comfort in the fact that I'm kind of true to my belief system. I'm true to what I want to achieve out of um, designing.
Hmm.
And if at the end of it all, as a little wrinkly grey-haired guy about to trip off this mortal coil, it'd be good to think that I could look back and go, well, I did it my way.
For sure.
So it's kind of there's a little bit of idealism mixed in there as well. So it keeps things fresh, definitely.